You're watching Global Insights, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. I'm Oh Young. China's President Xi Jinping begins a historic third term and asserts his unequivocal grip on the top ranks of the country's ruling Chinese Communist Party, with loyalists named in the Politburo and the Standing Committee. Through the cosmic scale of his power, comparable to that of Chairman Mao Zedong and the Xi Jinping Thought enshrined in China's constitution, observers believe that Xi may even rule for life, extending his authoritarian measures across Chinese society and rather abrasive diplomacy abroad. Where does Xi Jinping intend to take China, and how does he want to reshape the world? For the answers, we turn to Sungmin Cho, Professor of the Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies and Academic Institute of the U.S. Department of Defense. Very warm welcome to you, Dr. Cho. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
And well, over the past week, over the last 2 weeks really, there's been a lot of anticipation, a lot of watchful eyes as the Chinese Communist Party held its National Party Congress. And well, it seems that Xi has surrounded himself with loyalists really in the Standing Committee. And it seems that he's not really the first among equals anymore, but simply the first and only. And well, we really want to know, Professor Cho, what was your biggest takeaway or the strongest impression that you were left with after the week-long party congress?
Yes. So Xi Jinping was well expected to become the paramount leader in having the third term. There was no surprise about that. But still, I'm impressed with the two takeaways. First is that Xi Jinping is now so powerful, so he will be the center of every problem in China. So before the third term, there were Wang Yang and Li Keqiang from the different faction. So people imagine that, although we don't know the decision-making process, but we imagine that there will be some diverse opinions within the party. But now Xi Jinping dominates the party, so whatever the problem happens, he will be responsible for. So although he becomes strong, but also that makes him more vulnerable to accusations if things go wrong. And second, I'm struck by how pessimistic and insecure he is. In his keynote speech, he emphasized a lot about stability and security. For example, in his speech, he mentioned stability, the security, the word 91 times compared to 36 times that Hu Jintao used the same term in 2012 when he was in the party congress. So that reflects Xi Jinping emphasized the security 3 times more than Hu Jintao. So the more you emphasize security, that only means that you feel insecure inside. So Xi Jinping may look powerful and confident outside, but internally, that also means that he feels very insecure and pessimistic about the external environment.
Well, Professor, we know that the decision makers of Beijing, they do include former leaders of the Chinese Communist Party, but we didn't see the likes of Jiang Zemin there at the National Party Congress. And speaking of Hu Jintao, what on earth do you think really happened to him? I mean, was his removal from the party meeting, do you think it was meant to be disclosed?
Yes, so Hu Jintao was escorted out by the guard. And then that causes intense speculation among the experts around the world. There are 2 theories to explain what happened. The first is that Xi Jinping meant to put Hu Jintao in public humiliation, signaling his dominance of power, and then the end of Hu Jintao era, with his remaining faction totally eliminated from the party. The second theory is that Hu Jintao is in fact ill, and Xi Jinping was worried about his disrupting the closing ceremony by trying to open the sensitive document in advance. So Xi Jinping waved to call the guard to escort him out, Hu Jintao out. So between the 2 theories, I tend to believe the second. I don't think Xi Jinping planned to humiliate Hu Jintao in public. If that was his plan, he could easily do that in the middle of closing ceremony, not before the closing ceremony, and also calling all the tall police in uniform to take Hu Jintao out in front of all the audience. But Xi Jinping did that before the closing ceremony. So it was not pre-planned, it was an incident. But that said, I'm still surprised how the leaders did not really show respect to Hu Jintao when he was departing the room. Everyone just keeps looking at front, and then no one dared to look back and then bid farewell to the previous leader. And that only reveals how powerful Xi Jinping he is in the party.
Right, surprised and very much mystified. That was pretty much the reaction all over the world. And well, in the spring and in March next year, it's expected that Li Qiang is going to become the premier at the National People's Congress. And well, why do you think he's been appointed as number 2? And what do you think his appointment is going to mean for China's domestic politics?
Yes, I think Li Qiang was selected for 2 reasons. Of course, he is loyal to Xi Jinping, but at the same time, he has some background in economic management. So first, he is a loyalist to Xi Jinping. His career, he owes his career path to Xi Jinping's selection all time. But his poor handling of COVID-19 in Shanghai triggered public protest, and then Shanghai middle class, they outcry for Li Qiang's leadership. But despite the public anger, Li Qiang was still selected to the 2nd ranking powerful position in the party. That means loyalty is more than anything else important for Xi Jinping's selection of the standing Politburo committee members. But second, Li Qiang still has some experience in managing the financial capital of Shanghai. And then the people who know Li Qiang also testimony that he's pragmatic and he's pro-business. So what this means is that if Xi Jinping wants to change the policy, moving away from common prosperity and then putting the policy back to emphasize economic growth, he can rely on Li Qiang because he can trust in Li Qiang. Li Keqiang was not such a case because Li Keqiang was from the different faction. So even if Xi Jinping wanted to correct his failing policy, he could not really delegate the authority to Li Keqiang. But Li Qiang is trustworthy for Xi Jinping. Or Xi Jinping may decide to stick to his old policy, although it is economically damaging. It ensures his political control over the society. So either way, so we don't really know what Xi Jinping's economic policy for the 3rd term, but what we know for sure is that Li Qiang will be the convenient tool for Xi Jinping, whatever policy he chooses.
Well, some are speculating that he will just be a mini Xi once he is put in premiership. And well, China's political theorist Wang Huning, he's now stayed on the standing committee as well. And of course, former state councillor Wang Yi is going to lead foreign policy, it seems. And well, what does this say about Beijing's foreign policy and foreign policy ambitions, rather, and objectives going forward?
Yes, so Wang Huning designs the motto of China Dream, and then he's the brain behind China's wolf warrior, very assertive and aggressive policy. And then Wang Yi is also rewarded with this time selection for his aggressive and very pressing posture in diplomatic settings. So the selection of Wang Yi and Qin Gang, also the previous Chinese ambassador to U.S., that signals the continuity of China's aggressive and tough policy. The problem is that China's aggressive policy only invites more aggressive and tough policies from the U.S. and international community. But that reaction also shapes Xi Jinping's pessimistic perception about external environment. So what this all means is that Xi Jinping's 3rd term China will dig itself into the security dilemma with other countries. The more China takes hostile policy towards outside, outside world also respond with negative policies, and they will give Xi Jinping into a bigger dilemma.
So really intensifying this zero-sum game that we're already seeing. And well, that leads to my next question, really. Where do you think this will lead to in terms of Beijing's relations with Washington? Do you think China's in for the long game?
Yes, definitely the Chinese think that China is in the long game in its competition with the US. There is no doubt that Chinese leaders and analysts, they select US as the biggest threat. What that means is that they well understand China is years away from challenging the US military capabilities. So they know that China is still very weaker than the US power. Otherwise, they don't think the US as a threat. But again, the problem is that so China wants to accumulate power and the military capabilities without challenging the US directly. So that has been China's strategy, so-called gray zone operation during the US Trump administration. So China was picking fights and then problems in South China Sea and East China Sea. But China was very careful not to directly challenge the US military. In the Biden administration, the new China policy, the US new China policy is to gather support from the allies and partners. So to match with the new Biden administration's China policy, China also tries to gather support from developing countries in the Middle East, Latin America, or Africa, or so-called the global South. So there is this dynamic that China also gathers support from its allies or friends and partners to match and balance the US alliance system.
And of course, you said that China isn't really directly challenging the US right now, but using these grey zone operations. And there are concerns, though, that there are going to be potential military clashes as tensions rise over Taiwan. Do you see a greater chance of that happening soon with the new appointments in Beijing?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that now Xi Jinping has a greater decision-making power within the party. So that means that no one really criticize or oppose Xi Jinping's decision-making within the party. So that increased the possibility of Xi Jinping's miscalculation, especially when economic problems are increasing within China. Xi Jinping may try to distract Chinese people's attention from the domestic problems to outside by provoking the Taiwan issue. So that is similar to Russia's Putin's miscalculation. Putin is so powerful, so he made a strategic calculation when he decided to invade Ukraine. But still, the difference is that while Putin was suspecting whether Western governments, the US, will intervene to support Ukraine militarily, Chinese strategists and Chinese leaders, they are very convinced that the US will intervene if China invades Taiwan or take military actions. And also, given the critical position of Taiwan in the global supply chain of semiconductors, it is not only the US, the whole international community will respond to China's military actions in Taiwan. So, and then that will also damage China's own economy. So given these two factors of the US intervention and then Taiwan's status in the global economy, Xi Jinping has many reasons to hesitate to make decisions to make military moves against Taiwan.
And Professor, amid these geopolitical uncertainties, there's growing concern that North Korea might think this is a good time to start continuing its missile provocations, which it has, and also launch what many predict will be a seventh nuclear test. Do you think China has accepted North Korea as a nuclear state? I mean, the two are known to distrust each other under the mask of socialist solidarity, of course. And Beijing, it seems to have admitted that it has rather limited influence over its smaller ally. But, well, at the moment, what do you think Beijing's policy is on North Korea?
I imagine that the Chinese analysts and strategists, they are having very hard time to formulate China's North Korea policy, China's next North Korea policy. So China clearly opposes North Korea's nuclear status, but China also values the stability. So China always hesitates to press North Korea over a nuclear issue. That's why the Chinese diplomat in the United Nations, he clearly say China opposes North Korea's nuclear test, but he does not really oppose sanctioning North Korea for other military provocations. The problem is that there is an assumption that China may influence Pyongyang's decision-making process because North Korea relies on China for economic survival. But the COVID-19, North Korea completely shut down the border, and there was substantially no trade between China and North Korea. So COVID did more than the international sanctions that China, even if China joined. And then North Korea still survived and made advancement in military capabilities. So that only reveals the limit of China's economic influence to change North Korea's behavior. So losing the capability to influence Pyongyang, now Chinese decision makers should think hard how to influence North Korea's decision making.
I see, Professor. Well, thank you very much for your time today. That was Sungmin Cho, Professor of the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, part of the U.S. Department of Defense. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.